we more or less familiar with the term fronts because these fronts actually enormously affect the United States weather and climate. So we can now in a position to study them in depth. So we will now learn about the general nature of fronts, how they move, and what weather patterns are associated with them. So a front by definition is a transition between two air masses of different density. As density differences are most often caused by temperature differences, fronts usually separates air masses with the temperature differences. Often they separate air masses with different humidities as well. Remember that the air masses have both horizontal and vertical extent. Consequently, the upward extension of a front is referred to as a frontal surface or frontal zone, or also we call frontal boundary. If you are looking at this figure over the slide, the polar front represents a cold frontal boundary that separates colder air from the warmer air at the surface and above. The more shallow Arctic front separates cold air from extremely cold air. So this illustrates the vertical extent of two large-scale frontal zones. First, the polar front and the Arctic front. The polar front boundary, which extends upward more than 5 kilometers or 3 miles from the surface, and it also separates the warm, humid air to the south from the cold polar air to the north. The Arctic front, which separates cold air from extremely cold Arctic air, and it is shallower than the polar front and only extends upward to an altitude of 1 to 2 kilometers, we guess. So we will be talking about in the further that's all front that have horizontal and vertical extent. If you are looking at this figure over the map, so this one is actually four front, a surface weather map showing surface pressure system, air masses, front, and isobar in millibar as a solid gray line. Large arrow in color shows airflow. Green shaded area represent rain. Pink shaded area represent freezing rain and sleet. White shaded area represent snow. So we have to be familiar with all these symbols and we already know some of them. So if you are looking at this map, the map shows a surface weather map illustrating four different fronts. If you look at very closely, you will notice that the front are associated with lower pressure and that the front separate differing air masses. As we move from the west to east across the map in here, the front appear in the following order: a stationary front between point A and point B, a cold front between point B and point C, a stationary front between point C and D, and the occluded front between point C and L. So we will be actually discussing that in details in the coming discussion of four different types of front in details. By now we know that